Hey everyone, welcome to my new video on JavaScript concepts. Today's concept is Nullish Coalescence, and I'm going to jump into it, but before I do, I just want you guys to know that all these files that I'm presenting to you are going to be available on a GitHub repository, which will be linked below in the description. Today, I'm going to go through two examples and then, as usual, a use case of how we're going to be using Nullish Coalescence. So, let's get started. Nullish coalescing operators are written as double question marks as denoted here. And how they work is that rather than using or statements to differ between two values, we would rather have a nullish coalescence operator, which would help us differ between null and undefined values. So as you can see here in both scenarios, in example 1, that x and y will both not be taken into consideration, and rather we would jump to the other side, which is default. So in both cases, we're going to get default. So in this example, it's very simple. If we were to use an or statement, it would actually be the same output that we'd be looking for. But here's where it differs a little bit, and I'll go into that in example 2. Now in example 2, we'll actually see 3 scenarios on both sides. So as you can see over here in line 2 and 3 versus line 6 and 7, the output is both default, but you would notice in line 1 and line 5, you can notice the difference between these two is that actually nullish coalescence is returning false in this case. So the reason why nullish coalescence is returning false in this case is because it is not reading that false as a null or undefined. Now, the reason why or statements return default rather than null or undefined, and on top of that, when they see false, they would return default, is because or statements are differing between a falsy versus a truthy value. By falsy, I mean any value that can be considered false. There's a total of 6 false values that you can have in JavaScript. Those are false, null, undefined, nan, empty strings, 0, and yeah, so those are your 6. I think I had them all. You can comment if I missed any of them at all, but falsy values are what or statements differ between. So in this case, they would always choose the right side if there's anything that's false here, if it was a 0 or an empty string. But nullish coalescence kind of takes that, narrows it down, and only looks for null and undefined situations. So I'll jump now into the use case where we'll find over here. So we'll be, in this example, printing a user. And in this example, we want to print a user, and if there is a undefined user, we would want to print anonymous. In this case, we want it to be undefined because there might be scenarios where users don't want to let their name out, or they want to keep it private. They will not input anything for their name, and it will be considered anonymous. And to also optimize our code, what we want to, or not optimize our code, rather, we want to make it look more cleaner whenever we're printing someone's username. So what we're going to do is we're going to trim that string that we get, feed it into our function. Now the trim function, it's basically taking out all these white spaces between any actual characters. So if there was an A in the middle, over in this case, it would take out the spaces here and here. But in our example, we're going to do this. So ideally, what happens is when we have 4 spaces like this, we're actually going to end up with an empty string in this case. And an empty string is, as I mentioned earlier, a falsy value. Now, in cases like these, the use case will actually give us an anonymous output for a user who just has spaces as their name. Now, if we were to take this back, because in this case, we will probably just trim it down. This user probably just doesn't have a name, and this is a very edge case, but it's nice to take into account for. And you'd notice when we have the updated with nullish coalescence operator, we will actually get an output of the empty user as the username rather than anonymous. So I'll run it over here, and you'll notice in this case, you'll see username is anonymous, and in this case, username is empty string, but it won't result into anonymous. So there are scenarios where, there are other scenarios too, where maybe you're going through an object and you realize that the is admin is, instead of it being false, is actually undefined or null because it was never added into that object. So in cases like that, you'd also want to consider using nullish coalescence, and it also is an effective way to handle these situations. So that's all from my end. I hope you guys enjoy the video. If you need any examples, or in, like I mentioned in before, the GitHub repository will have the README, which would give us a more interactive experience if it comes to like just reading the document for you guys. But other than that, thank you for your time, and I'll see you guys another day.